momentarily, Pat and Alec are going to talk to you about how to talk to the media. But first, I'm going to tell you why you should talk to the media, and that's because you have the First Amendment right to do so. In fact, school board members are elected representatives. As such, school board members have robust First Amendment rights. Unlike teachers or public employees, school board members maintain the right to speak on vast topics of public concern like education policy, governance, and public spending. Let's contrast this to teachers' speech. As you may have learned this morning, teachers' First Amendment speech rights are much more limited, and courts implement a balancing test known as the Pickering test. A teacher's speech may be protected when speaking as a citizen on matters of public concern. If speech falls into that category, the court weighs the employee's First Amendment interest against the interest of the state as an employer in promoting the workplace efficiency, discipline, and the delivery of public services. However, when public employees make statements pursuant to their official duties, their speech is not protected and can be disciplined by their employer. School board members occupy a fundamentally different constitutional position than teachers and public employees. Most district courts have determined that these legal balancing tests do not apply to elected officials and board members. That is because school board members are not in an employee-employer relationship with the district. Unlike a superintendent, principal, or teacher, whose speech on job-related matters may receive little or no First Amendment protection, a board member who speaks on public concerns is exercising the very democratic function the First Amendment is designed to protect. The classification of school board members as elected officials means that a school board member enjoys the full protection of the First Amendment when speaking on matters of public concern, like school curriculum and instruction, school safety and discipline, budget and taxation, and policy and governance. Under Wisconsin law and applicable federal constitutional principles, school board members are not required to speak only in official settings on matters of education policy. They are generally free to communicate directly with constituents, individually, or at public gatherings. I would note to keep the open meetings law in mind. Wisconsin's open meetings law imposes an important structural limitation when a quorum of board members convene for the purpose of exercising official board duties. The gathering constitutes a meeting subject to public notice and open sessions requirements. While boards speak with one voice for purposes of official action, and as such, a board may designate an official spokesperson for official district statements, individual board members retain the ability to speak individually on school issues. You may publicly disagree with the board decisions or policies. This may be obvious, but we want to remind you that uniformity of opinion is not required to be an elected official. It is okay to be a minority opinion on a board. Board members may use personal accounts to communicate with the public, but I say this with a few warnings. First, Wisconsin open records law is animated by a strong presumption of public access. The law clearly states all persons are entitled to the greatest possible information regarding the affairs of government and the official acts of those officers who represent them. So really, you should try your best to ensure public statements on official matters are easily available to the public. Moreover, if you post official information on your personal account, be aware that you may be creating a public record that is subject to the Public Records Law. Furthermore, you should be aware of a somewhat recent United States Supreme Court decision regarding a mixed-used account where both personal and official information is shared. This case is known as Lindke v. Freed. In that case, a city manager had a Facebook account. His bio identified him as the city manager with a link to the city's website. His posts were prolific and primarily about his family and personal in nature. However, he did occasionally post about city information. After the COVID-19 pandemic began, Freed posted about COVID policies. A Facebook user named Lindke commented on some of Freed's COVID posts, disagreeing with the city's approach to the pandemic and making some negative comments. The city manager deleted the comments and then ultimately blocked the commenter from commenting at all on his account. Lindke, the commenter, sued under Section 1983 on the grounds that deleting his comments and blocking him from commenting violated his First Amendment rights. The US Supreme Court took the case and created a legal test to determine whether a post constitutes state action. The court said, a post is state action when the public official possessed actual authority to speak on the state's behalf on the relevant matter and purported to exercise that authority in the specific posts at issue. After establishing that test, the court returned the case to the lower court for them to apply the test to the facts of the case. Here's what we can take away from this case. If you want to mitigate any risk of violating this legal test and violating your constituents' First Amendment rights, here are a few suggestions. Either create a separate public account where you post public information and keep it separate from your private account, or keep the private account and put a disclaimer in your bio that the views expressed on your account do not represent the school board. In fact, the Supreme Court said, quote, if the city manager's account had carried a label like, this is the personal page of James R. Freed, he would have been entitled to a heavy presumption that all of his posts were personal. Or, alternatively, put a disclaimer at the end of a post saying the communication is not on behalf of the school board and merely reflects your individual opinion. So now that I've armed you with your First Amendment rights, we'll quickly go over some common misconceptions. First, only the superintendent or board president may speak to the media. False. Official messaging may be centralized, but your individual First Amendment rights remain intact. Board members cannot respond to constituents. Incorrect. Board members are elected to represent the public and can speak directly, subject to laws that govern student confidentiality. So be aware of FERPA. You don't want to share any personal identified information about students. And then additionally, under the Open Records Law, you shouldn't be sharing information relating to performance evaluations. And then next, criticizing district decisions is prohibited. Wrong. Raising concerns with the district is fully protected. So best practices going forward is clarify when speaking in an individual capacity, keep communications factual and professional, engage regularly with the public, ask for legal authority if told you may not speak. Reminder, other board members have a free speech right to criticize you. The First Amendment goes both ways. So I will leave you with this quote from the United States Supreme Court. In this country, we expect elected representatives to shoulder a degree of criticism about their public service from their constituents and their peers, and to continue exercising their free speech rights when the criticism comes. Thank you. Now I'd like to turn things over to Alec and Pat.
Hello. Okay. Oh, sorry, went the wrong way. Okay, so media and message. So we're going to talk a little bit about media, social media, and the message you're supposed to deliver on these platforms. So let's start with why media matters. I think it's probably a little obvious, but I'm just going to throw that stat up there, and we're going to revisit it at the end. People are consuming social media. They're consuming media. Journalists are using social media to push stories. Stories are pushing a narrative and a conversation. So really, how I look at every single media outlet is you can either be a part of the story or you cannot be. And again, I think it's just pretty obvious that anybody in this position, the position you guys are in, you want to be a part of the story, and we're going to get into why.
Just to build off what Pat said there, too, I think an important aspect of this, and we'll get through it today as we go through this, just big picture, a lot of the work with reporters that you're going to hear us talk about is all relational. I'm sure that you all have outlets that cover your boards regularly. You may have outlets that cover your boards sporadically. There's been a huge consolidation amongst the press that I think we're all familiar with, where you'll have one Gannett reporter from the Journal-Sentinel whose responsibility is to cover your board and maybe like 3 or 4 other boards or municipalities at the same time. And so it's really important, in my mind, and the thing I've advised local candidates on extensively is to build those relationships, because if the only time you're talking with those people is during a negative experience, you're going to have a tougher time breaking through. And so, you know, you may not always like the angles that they take. You may not always think that their coverage is fair, and in fact, we know that oftentimes their coverage isn't fair. But building those relationships is going to help you with a lot of heartache when those hard stories come, and you're going to be able to get your message out there even more. Just breaking that down, though, what is a message? As we look to move forward, we have some tips on the best ways to build a message up on the screen. The way I always like to look at it, and when I'm doing an interview, is you take your one sentence that you want to break through a wall when you're talking to that reporter on the record, and then your 3 or 4 supporting facts that support that one sentence. And distilling it down that way before you do an interview or before you think about talking to the media is super important because it helps make sure that you stay on message, you avoid the kind of rambling that sometimes happens when you do an interview, and it gives you points that you can swing back to every single time you talk during that interview. The other thing is, as you're building that message, don't just think about what's right in your mind, but think about what you want that reporter's audience to take away from it. You're not trying to talk to the reporter necessarily. You're trying to talk to the person that the reporter is talking to. And so when you're crafting those messages, craft them with the audience in mind and craft them in a way that can really break through to a reporter with that one message that's important. Anything you want to add?
No, I think that's perfect. Okay, so next slide is, okay, so how, why do interviews matter? And I think it's a couple of things. Like Alex just talked about, the audience really matters, right? Your job is not to convince the reporter that your answer is correct. I just want to say it one more time. Your job is to not convince the reporter that your answer is correct. Your job is to provide important context for their story that, whether you like it or not, is going out the door. And so, like I said, we talked about the beginning of this, is you can be a part of the story or you cannot. And then I just think the last thing I want to cover on this slide is we see interviews at the Wisconsin Institute for Law and Liberty as an opportunity. So we go out of our way to take any interview that comes our way. It is a time for us to educate the public and contribute to public discourse. So that is the approach we have here at Will. We are an organization that many describe as lean conservative. That's not going to be a surprise to anybody in this room. But when the Milwaukee Journal-Sentinel reaches out to us, when Wisconsin Watch reaches out to us, when NBC reaches out to us, when MSNBC reaches out to us, we will take the time to walk the reporter through our point of view. And 99 out of 100 times, the story is going to turn out better than if you just didn't do that. So that's my advice to everybody in this room, and we could move to the next slide.
Can I just
go for it.
Add one thing there? I think that's important, and I think the stories, I don't want to freak people out to think this whole thing is about playing defense, right? The only time you're going to use these tips isn't just when you're under attack, but also think through like how you can positively tell your stories. Like some of your boards are doing really cool things in your districts. Maybe it's as simple as like a robotics team that went to state, right? Do you have a local newspaper reporter that you can pick up the phone and call and say, hey, you should go interview this teacher, this principal, this kid that just did something really cool, and can I give you some background on how our board supported that and made it possible, right? Like think through those positive stories that you can tell. It's not just the defense or the controversial culture war issues that we see. It's also like building that credibility with the reporter's audience ahead of time so that when they do see those hard stories, they know that you have the kid's best interests at heart.
Yeah, I would say people look at these relationships with reporters in such a hostile context way too often. Like what Alex just talked about, and there was a seminar before this one where I think it was the Kettle Moraine School District talked about how they don't have any sort of debt at all. I would be posting about that, talking about that until you see your social media engagement go down. Like I just think these schools don't realize like you're a school, you're teaching kids, you're preparing them for the future. That is a great service. You talk about all the things in government that isn't going right, but then we have, again, your school district doing so many good things, but you're not talking about it. And so a reporter is not expected to know unless you tell them. And so once you develop these relationships and once they know your name, once you know their name, it's way easier to get them on the phone and talk to them. I've worked in, Alec and I, we've worked in all these different facets of communications, like, Wisconsin Institute for Law and Liberty, we're a 501c3, a governor's office, like they're all different, but like a school is like, you guys are just on such an opportunity of potential. And so you guys should be telling these stories. The robotics team's a great idea. Your kids are doing great things. You guys are doing great things. When you guys balance a budget, like that is a great story. That is, taxpayers in your district can be like, okay, my school board is doing the right things because you're telling them that. So we can probably go to the next slide.
Yeah, now we're going to get into the nitty-gritty a little bit more of how a story comes together and sort of some tips and tricks that you should use as you're talking to those reporters and as those things come out there. Deadlines are the most important thing in news. Every newspaper reporter has a time where they have to post their story, or their editors need to see their story by, and they need to turn the story. And if you want to have a say in what the first draft of their story looks like, you have to know what their deadline is. So if you're thinking about talking to a reporter, even if you're not sure you're going to talk to a reporter, a safe question to always ask right away is, what's your deadline? So that you know what it is and you can meet that. It kind of rolls into the second point, which is silence isn't safety. Pat kind of talked about this at the outset. Just because you don't want to talk or you think their angle is bad, it robs you of the opportunity to tell your story if you ignore them. I'm not going to say that you should respond to 100% of press inquiries. That would be bad advice. But there's a little bit of discernment that goes into what you respond to and what you don't. And almost always it's safer to talk than not to talk. And so I think that that's really, really an important thing as you kind of think through how to manage the press. The last thing is, especially if you're dealing with TV, it's going to be an assigned story to a reporter that may or may not have background. And so it's important for you to think through how to approach somebody who may not have 100% of the history that you do in an experience of an issue when you're giving that response, and kind of thinking through what it is that you want to say to get them up to speed right away. If it's a print reporter, generally speaking, they're going to be around a little bit more like a newspaper or a blog, and so they're going to have a little bit more of a lead into knowing what's going on. And again, it's why it's important that you identify those people who cover your boards most regularly, you talk to them, and that you build those relationships so that you can rely on them to tell the story when the time comes.
This is probably my favorite slide of this entire slide deck, so we're just going to leave it up for like 5 more seconds so everyone can have time to make a note of it. Your time's up. We're moving on. What do we got here? Planning for an interview? Yeah, okay, so this is all about how you can capitalize on this opportunity. And so you have to know, you're going to get either in 2 situations. We talked about you're kind of pitching this robotic story, or the reporter's coming to you with a question, or you're pitching the fact that you guys have a surplus, right? So you're going to want to know the goal of the interview and whether that's defense or offense. You're going to want to, again, know your audience, and then you're going to want to know a couple message points to really drive home what you're trying to say. The best way to do this is to do a mock interview beforehand. I think that is probably one of the best strategies that I've employed over 10 to 12 years of communication strategy. A reporter is going to ask questions and take a lot of what you're going to say. So you have to have a little bit of rehearsed. You have to have rehearsed a little bit of what you want to get across.
Find somebody who's not afraid to ask you tough questions or give you a hard time. If you find somebody who likes you and is a yes man, the mock interview is worthless. You need to find somebody who's willing to ask you really hard questions and make you angry.
Yeah, actually, it's a really fun part of the job. All right, next slide. This is some do's and don'ts, and Alex is going to walk you through them.
Yeah, these are the key points in an interview. When you're doing an on-record interview, you want to make sure that, again, it's that one sentence that's your message and the 2 to 3 supporting points, and you can just roll back through them again and again and again and again. Know the medium. So if you're in a live interview, which I would think for most folks in this room is probably going to be rare, if you're in a live interview, you have to be a little bit more polished. You should be a little bit more prepared because you only get one take at it. If it's taped on TV, like a reporter is coming and saying, hey, can I talk to you for a segment on the 5 o'clock news? Or if it's a newspaper interview, you can pause and collect yourself and think before you answer a question. You don't have to fire off. They're going to edit it, and they're going to edit out the awkward pauses at the beginning and the middle and the end. And so just remember that like the stakes in those interviews are high, but you have the way they compile their story is going to give you a chance so that you don't necessarily have to be perfect. Avoid the long-winded or off-topic answers. It's so easy to get in an interview and just ramble and ramble and ramble. And we've all watched live television where we've seen it. We've been like, dude, stop talking. This is annoying. That is just the importance of that one message and those supporting points to that message. Like, go into that interview and know what you're going to say as your top line that you want somebody to take away, and then those supporting points, 1, 2, 3, that you can just lean on and keep pivoting back to again and again and again. And it's going to feel robotic. It really is. But it's the best way to stay on message, and it's the best way to get your message across.
Okay, so obviously COVID-19 changed a lot of things, and one of the things in comms is that now everything's on Zoom, and Zoom has kind of ruined our lives, I honestly think. I'm not a pro Zoom guy. I'm an old school conference call guy. Nobody needs to be on video. We just really just need to just talk about what we need to talk about. But that's not the world we live in. People are on Zoom. TV reporters are much more likely to do an interview on Zoom. We deal with this at Will all the time. Again, 6 years ago, it was like, if you're not doing this in person, we're either might do it on the phone or we're just not going to talk to you. So now you have to kind of, this is why this is a slide today, is that the Zoom interview prep and how it looks on Zoom is going to make your social media content so much better. If your lighting is bad, if your sound is bad, if the angle is bad, and if your backdrop is bad, you could have had just a great interview, but if there's like some kind of like weird sign behind you or something, you're not going to want to post that on social media. Like, you've kind of blown your opportunity to capitalize on your interview. So at Will, we make sure everybody has a ring light. We make sure people have microphones. They position their camera. All these things that we talk about, we really capitalize on that. We're building a studio in our basement at our new office, just because, again, especially, not a situation you're going to be in, but national reporters, if you ever find yourself in a national interview, the one thing that's going to drive them nuts is a bad Zoom setup. And then the last thing that I don't think we mention on here is internet connection. If you don't test your internet before you do a Zoom and you're breaking up, they may just not use it. And like, this is what I'm talking about. Now all of a sudden your 5 o'clock, 6 o'clock, 10 o'clock news segment is going to air. Your audio is bad, so you're not included in the story. So Zoom interview is really important, and that's why we spent a little bit of time on that today.
I think it's social media.
Yep, social.
So I bet if I took a show of hands here of folks who can identify problems that they see or hear about in their district on social media, everyone would raise their hand. I mean, Facebook is a prolific source of information for folks, good or bad these days. And so I think the thing that I have to stress to this group is it's not a forum that you can avoid anymore. You have to be on social media, talking to constituents, telling your story, because otherwise the opposition will be on those formats talking, telling your story for you, and I don't think that anybody wants that. In addition to that, it's important to remember that, like, journalists are people too. They're on social media, they're looking at social media, they are picking their stories, choosing their stories sometimes based on social media and what they're seeing. And so you want your content to be in that void because, one, sometimes it can get you good stories and it's good for you, but other times you just want your voice out there when there's bad stories or bad information going around to correct it. So it's increasingly a spot where we see folks getting their news. Legacy media is sort of fading, and most folks are getting their information from social media. And so just because you don't like a certain type of social media or you don't like the people who are on there, it's not an excuse not to be on there and telling your message.
I do think one part about legacy media, another point on that is like the press release in comms, in my opinion, is kind of dying. Like, you still have to do press releases. People still do them. But 10 years ago, that was the main form of communication. I see Will Flanders back here, if he can raise his hand really quick. So will tweet something timely and relevant, and we will text it to reporters and get far more coverage than if I spent 3 hours working on a press release. We get him in some sort of radio interview or on like the Center Square or something every single week just by him tweeting. So if you're not on these platforms, if you're not pushing your message on there, you're losing out on a huge earned media opportunity.